The hearing room was packed, every seat filled, every camera trained on the long table where power and ambition collided. Justice Samuel Alito sat at the center, his robe replaced by a suit, but his air of authority undiminished. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that makes every whisper feel like thunder. Across from him, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat poised, her notes stacked neatly, her expression unreadable. Alito's voice cut through the tension, smooth and cold. "Congresswoman Crockett, I'm sure your law degree has given you some understanding of these matters." He paused, letting the words hang, a smirk curling at the edge of his mouth. "But perhaps you'd like to clarify for us what exactly qualifies you to question the judgment of this court." A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Some of Alito's allies exchanged glances, their eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Crockett's supporters stiffened, bracing for the blow. The cameras zoomed in, catching every flicker of emotion, every tightening jaw, every nervous glance. Alito leaned back, his confidence absolute, his gaze fixed on Crockett, as if daring her to respond. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Her face was a mask of calm, her eyes steady, her hands folded. The silence stretched heavy and electric. For a moment, it seemed as if time itself had paused. The entire room suspended between insult and response. Alito's smirk deepened, convinced he'd landed the blow. "It's one thing to have a degree, Congresswoman. It's another to understand the law." His words echoed, sharp and dismissive, a challenge and a warning. The room held its breath. Crockett's allies watched, hope and anger mingling in their eyes. Her opponents waited for her to falter. The audience at home leaned in, hearts pounding, outrage simmering, but no one in that room or across America was prepared for what happened next. This was more than a clash between two public figures. It was a collision of worlds, one built on centuries of tradition and unchecked authority, the other rising from the lived experience of those who had always been told to wait their turn. In that hearing room, the stakes were nothing less than the soul of American justice. Across the country, trust in the courts was at a breaking point. Headlines blared about ethics scandals, secret meetings, and decisions that seemed to favor the powerful over the people. For millions, the Supreme Court no longer felt like a temple of fairness, but a fortress its doors closed to anyone who didn't fit the mold. Justice Alito, with his measured words and practiced detachment, was the face of that fortress. He spoke for the old guard, for the belief that wisdom belonged to those who had always held the gavel, but America was changing. In city halls and classrooms, in immigrant households and on college campuses, a new generation was demanding a seat at the table. They saw themselves in Jasmine Crockett not just because of her story, but because of her courage to speak truth to power. She was the voice of a new, diverse America, a woman who had earned her law degree not as a birthright, but as a battle scar. She carried with her the hopes of those who had been dismissed, doubted, and denied. The tension in the room was more than personal. It was generational, cultural, and deeply political. Alito's scoff wasn't just about Crockett's credentials. It was about who gets to question authority, who gets to define justice, who gets to belong. For every immigrant who had been told their accent was a liability, for every woman who had been told to smile and nod, for every young person who had been told to wait their turn, this moment was a test. Would the old rules hold? Or would a new voice finally break through? Crockett's calm was not just composure, was defiance. She knew what was at stake. She knew that every word, every pause, every look would be dissected by millions. She knew that her response would not just be about her, but about everyone who had ever been underestimated. The cameras captured it all, the tension, the hope, the simmering outrage. Social media buzzed with anticipation. Commentators whispered that this was the moment the old guard would finally be challenged, that the world was about to see what happens when dignity meets arrogance head dash on, because what happened in the next few minutes would send shockwaves far beyond the courtroom. It would ripple through newsrooms, classrooms, and living rooms across America. But to understand the true weight of this clash, you have to know who these two really are. To understand the force Jasmine Crockett was up against, you have to step into the world of Samuel Alito, a world defined by tradition, privilege, and a relentless climb to the top. Alito's story is not one of adversity, but of calculated ambition. Born into comfort, educated at the nation's most elite institutions, he learned early that the law was a ladder, and he was expected to climb it. He didn't have to fight for a seat at the table. The table was set for him. From his earliest days as a young attorney, Alito was a master of the inside game. He knew how to navigate the corridors of power, how to say just enough to please his mentors, to keep his true intentions hidden behind a veneer of civility. His rise was steady, almost inevitable. He clerked for powerful judges, served in the Justice Department, and built a reputation as a reliable, conservative voice measured. Unflappable, always in control, but beneath the surface there was something else, a quiet arrogance, a belief that the rules were his to interpret, that the law was a tool for those who understood its secret language. Alito's rulings on the bench reflected this mindset. He spoke of original intent and judicial restraint. But time and again, his decisions favored the powerful over the vulnerable. He voted to restrict voting rights, to limit reproductive freedom, to shield corporations from accountability. Each opinion was wrapped in legal jargon. But the message was clear. The status quo must be protected. Alito's public persona was that of the wise, impartial jurist. But there were moments when the mask slipped. In private conferences, colleagues described his impatience with dissent, his dismissiveness toward those who challenged his views. He was known to cut off debate, to bristle at questions, to wield his authority like a shield. For Alito, disagreement was not a sign of a healthy democracy. It was an inconvenience to be managed, a threat to be neutralized. His hypocrisy was not always loud, but it was ever present. He railed against judicial activism, while quietly expanding the court's reach into areas once left to the people. He spoke of respecting precedent, yet was quick to overturn decades of settled law when it suited his ideology. He demanded respect for the institution, was caught in private meetings with political operatives. Blurring the line between justice and partisanship, the frustration for those watching was palpable. How many times had they seen men like Alito wield their power with impunity, shutting out voices that dared to disrupt the order? How many times had they watched as the rules were bent, the standards shifted just to keep the same people in charge? Alito was not just a judge, he was a symbol of every closed door, every silenced voice, every dream deferred by those who believed they owned the future. And yet, for all his confidence, there were cracks in the armor. In moments of real challenge, when confronted by those who refused to be intimidated, Alito's composure would falter. The dismissiveness would give way to irritation, the calm to condescension. He was a man used to winning, not to being questioned, especially not by someone like Jasmine Crockett. His critics saw the double standards, the selective outrage, the way he invoked the law as both sword and shield. They saw the way he dismissed new voices, the way he clung to the old order, the way he scoffed at anyone who dared to challenge his authority. For them, Alito was not just a judge, he was the embodiment of a system that had always kept the gates locked. But the world was changing, the old playbook was starting to fail. The very arrogance that had carried Alito so far was now his greatest weakness. The more he tried to assert control, the more obvious it became that he was out of step with the country he claimed to serve. And so, as he sat in that hearing, dismissing Jasmine Crockett's law degree with a smirk, Alito believed he was untouchable. He believed the rules would protect him, as they always had. But while Alito built his legacy on the bench, Jasmine Crockett's journey was forged in the fire of real-world struggle. Jasmine Crockett's story doesn't begin in the halls of Congress or the marble corridors of a courthouse. It begins in a modest home on the edge of a city that never quite made room for girls like her. She was raised by parents who worked long hours and longer nights, who taught her that dignity wasn't something you waited for, it was something you carried. Even when the world tried to strip it away, her mother, a nurse, and her father, a mechanic, poured every ounce of hope into their daughter, telling her that education was her ticket to a life they could only dream of. School was Jasmine's first proving ground. She was the only black girl in her advanced classes, the one whose hand shot up with answers, whose questions were met with side eyes and whispers. Teachers praised her intelligence but warned her not to be too assertive. Classmates challenged her right to be there, as if her presence was a mistake. Jasmine learned early that she would have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. She studied late into the night, fueled by her parents' sacrifices and her own stubborn belief that she belonged. College was supposed to be a fresh start, but the challenges only grew sharper. She faced professors who doubted her, advisors who steered her away from ambition, and peers who saw her as a token. She worked nights to pay tuition, sent money home when she could, and still found time to organize protests and volunteer at legal clinics. Every obstacle was a reminder. The world would not make room for her. She would have to carve out her own space. Law school was a crucible. Jasmine was one of a handful of women of color in her class, and the pressure was relentless. She was told to tone it down, to wait her turn, to be grateful for the opportunity, but she knew that silence was complicity. She spoke up in class, challenged professors, and demanded that the law serve everyone, not just the privileged few. She graduated with honors, but more importantly, she left with a mission: to fight for those who had been told to wait. To be quiet, to accept less. Her career began in the trenches. As a public defender, Jasmine saw firsthand the cruelty of a system stacked against the poor. The black, the immigrant, the forgotten. She sat with mothers who couldn't afford bail, with teenagers facing decades behind bars for minor offenses, with families torn apart by policies written by people who would never know their names. She fought for every client as if they were her own family, because in so many ways they were. She lost cases she should have won cases she was told were hopeless, and earned a reputation as a fighter, relentless, compassionate, and unafraid. But the victories came at a cost. Jasmine faced threats, harassment, and relentless scrutiny. She was called angry, difficult, unprofessional, all the words used to put black women in their place. She was passed over for promotions, excluded from meetings, and told again and again that she didn't belong. But every setback only sharpened her resolve. She knew that her fight was bigger than her own career. She was fighting for every girl who had ever been told she was too much, every family who had ever been told they were not enough. When she ran for office, the odds were stacked against her. She had no wealthy donors, no powerful backers, no family name to open doors. What she had was a community that believed in her, a record of service, and a voice that refused to be silenced. She knocked on doors, listened to stories, and promised to bring those voices into the halls of power. Her campaign was dismissed as a long shot, a footnote in the political season. But Jasmine knew that underdogs don't just play the game, they change it. Her victory was more than a personal triumph. It was a message to every person who had ever felt invisible. You matter, you belong, and your voice can change the world. In Congress, Jasmine brought the same fire, the same compassion, the same refusal to accept the status quo. She challenged colleagues, demanded accountability, and spoke truth to power even when it made her a target. But what truly set Jasmine apart was her composure. In the face of insults, she stood tall. When dismissed, she doubled down. She understood that every attack was not just about hurt, was about everyone she represented. She carried the weight of her community, her ancestors, and every person who had ever been told to wait their turn. She turned pain into purpose, and purpose into power. And that's why, when the attack came, she didn't just survive, she made history. The hearing room, already tense, seemed to shrink as Justice Alito pressed his advantage. His words, once measured, now carried a sharper edge. Congresswoman Crockett, it's one thing to recite legal theory from a textbook. It's quite another to understand the real-world implications of the law. I'm not sure your experience in the courtroom quite prepares you for the complexities we face here. His tone was icy, his gaze unwavering, as if daring her to challenge the authority he wore like a second skin. A few of Alito's allies exchanged knowing glances, smirks barely concealed. They'd seen this play before, an old guard lion circling, ready to pounce. Crockett's supporters, meanwhile, shifted in their seats, eyes darting between her and Alito, worry etched across their faces. Some clenched their fists, others whispered encouragement under their breath, but all of them felt the weight of the moment. The stakes were no longer abstract. They were personal. Alito's voice rose, his frustration barely masked. "You speak of justice, Congresswoman, but what have you actually delivered? You talk about the people, but all I see is someone obsessed with the spotlight. You're not here to serve, you're here to be seen." He gestured dismissively as if brushing away a nuisance. The American people deserve substance, not sound bites. They deserve wisdom, not grandstanding. The room was thick with anticipation. Every camera was trained on Crockett, every phone in the gallery recording, every viewer at home waiting for her to crack. Alito leaned in, his tone growing colder. "You want to talk about sacrifice? About service? Tell us, Congresswoman, what have you sacrificed? What have you risked, besides your own reputation?" A hush fell. Even the usual chatter of aides and staffers faded into silence. Crockett's face remained impassive, her eyes locked on Alito. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. The contrast was stark. Alito, red-faced and animated, his words tumbling over each other in a rush to wound. Crockett, still as stone, her composure unbroken. Her opponents watched with barely concealed glee, convinced they were witnessing a takedown. They whispered to each other, certain that Crockett would finally be exposed, finally be put in her place. But her allies saw something different. They saw the set of her jaw, the calm in her eyes, the quiet strength that had carried her through storms far fiercer than this. Alito, sensing victory, pressed on. "You claim to represent the people, but you don't speak for me. You don't speak for the millions of Americans who are tired of this circus. You're not a leader, you're a distraction." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. For a moment, it seemed as if the old order had reasserted itself, as if the gatekeepers had slammed the door shut once more. The room was silent, the tension almost unbearable. Crockett's allies held their breath, her opponents waited for her to falter, and the audience at home leaned in, hearts pounding. But Crockett didn't falter. She didn't blink. She sat, perfectly poised, letting the silence stretch, letting Alito's words echo and fade. The power in the room shifted, almost imperceptibly, as if everyone sensed that something was about to break. But then, with the nation watching, Jasmine Crockett reached for the documents and everything changed. Jasmine Crockett's hand hovered over the stack of documents, her fingers steady, her gaze unwavering. The room was silent, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Alito's words still hung in the air, but their power was already fading, replaced by a new, electric anticipation. Crockett's allies watched, hope flickering in their eyes. Her opponents leaned forward, eager for a stumble. The nation waited. She drew a breath, slow and deliberate, letting the tension build. Then, with a voice as clear as glass, she began. "Justice Alito, I appreciate your concern for my legal education. It's always interesting to hear lectures on courtroom experience from someone who's spent decades shielded from the realities faced by everyday Americans." A ripple moved through the chamber, some gasps, some stifled laughter. Alito's jaw tightened, but Crockett pressed on, her words measured, each one landing with precision. "You ask what I've sacrificed. Let me tell you. I've sacrificed sleep, safety, and certainty. I've walked into courtrooms where the odds were stacked against my clients and against me, and I fought anyway. I've stood up for families who had no one else to stand for them. I've risked my career, my reputation, and sometimes my life, because justice isn't just a word to midst a promise." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The camera zoomed in, catching the flicker of doubt in Alito's eyes. Crockett's voice softened, but her resolve only grew stronger. "You say I'm obsessed with the spotlight. But the only reason there's a spotlight on me is because I refuse to let injustice hide in the shadows. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's because you're used to a world where people like me are supposed to stay quiet." A murmur swept through the chamber. On social media, the moment was already catching fire. Tweets flew, "She's speaking for all of us. This is what courage looks like." Hashtags began to trend. Hashtag Crockett clapback. Hashtag truth to power. Hashtag mic drop moment. Crockett leaned in, her eyes never leaving Alito's. "You talk about leadership. But real leaders don't tear people down to build themselves up. Real leaders listen. Real leaders serve. Real leaders know that their job is to open doors, not slam them shut. Alito shifted in his seat, his confidence slipping. The smirks on his allies' faces faded, replaced by uncertainty. Crockett's allies sat up straighter, pride shining in their eyes. The audience at home could feel the shift. The underdog was no longer on the defensive. She was in control. Crockett continued, her voice rising with conviction. You want to talk about results? Let's talk about results. I've helped pass legislation that puts food on families' tables, that keeps kids in school, that gives people a second chance. I've worked with people who don't look like me, who don't agree with me, because I know that progress doesn't come from division, it comes from unity. She paused again, letting the silence speak. The chamber was wrapped, every eye fixed on her. Alito looked away, his bravado crumbling. Crockett's words were not just a defense, they were an indictment. A mirror held up to the old guard's hypocrisy. On Twitter, the memes exploded. A split screen of Alito's stunned face and Crockett's calm defiance. GIFs of mic drops, of fireworks, of crowds cheering. Commentators rushed to weigh in. This is a masterclass in composure. She just rewrote the rules. History in the making. Crockett's voice softened, but her words cut deeper. You say, I don't speak for you. That's fine. I speak for the people who've been ignored, dismissed, and told to wait their turn. I speak for the families who can't afford to wait. I speak for the future you keep trying to hold back. A hush fell, deeper than before. Even Alito's staunchest supporters were silent, their certainty shaken. Crockett's allies exchanged glances of awe, some blinking back tears. The audience at home felt it too, a surge of pride, of validation, of hope. Crockett finished, her voice steady and sure. You can attack my record, my motives, my very presence in this chamber. But you can't erase the truth. I am here. I belong here. And I will not be silenced. Not by you, not by anyone. The chamber erupted, not in chaos, but in a wave of energy. Some applauded, others sat in stunned silence. Alito tried to recover, but the moment was gone. The power had shifted, and everyone knew it. Outside the chamber, the world reacted in real time. News alerts flashed. Crockett's response goes viral. Influencers posted reaction videos, their faces lit up with excitement. Young people shared clips, adding their own stories of being underestimated, of fighting to be heard. The hashtag soared, the memes multiplied, and the message was clear. Something had changed. Commentators on both sides scrambled to respond. Some tried to downplay the moment, calling it just another debate. But the truth was undeniable. Crockett's words had cut through the noise, had reached beyond the walls of Congress, had spoken to a nation hungry for authenticity, for courage, for a new kind of leadership in living rooms and classrooms. In break rooms and on buses, people watched and rewatched the clip. They saw themselves in Crockett's calm, in her fire, in her refusal to back down. They felt the sting of Alito's words, but they also felt the power of Crockett's response, a power that came not from anger, but from truth, as the echoes of her words faded. The chamber was stunned, but the real explosion was just beginning online. The instant Jasmine Crockett's words echoed through the chamber, the world outside erupted. Within seconds, the clip was everywhere, on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and group chats from coast to coast. Hashtags blazed across screens. Hashtag Crockett clap back. Hashtag law degree legend. Hashtag truth to power. The video racked up millions of views in minutes, each replay fueling a new wave of energy. Memes exploded into existence. One showed Crockett's poised face superimposed over a roaring lion. The caption, unbothered, unbreakable, unmatched. Another looped Alito's stunned reaction, paired with the words, when the old guard meets the new. TikTokers reenacted the exchange. Some with tears in their eyes, others with laughter, all with a sense of vindication. The internet had found its hero and its villain. Commentators scrambled to keep up. Progressive voices called it the moment the tables turned. A masterclass in dignity, the future of American leadership. Even some centrist pundits, usually cautious, admitted Crockett's composure was undeniable. She didn't just defend herself, she inspired a movement. On cable news, the clip played on a loop, anchors marveling at the clarity and force of her words. But the impact didn't stop at headlines or hot takes. In classrooms, teachers played the video asking students what courage looks like. In community centers, organizers replayed the moment, using it to rally volunteers and remind them why their voices matter. Young activists posted their own stories, tagging Crockett, thanking her for showing that you can stand tall. Even when the world tries to cut you down, marginalized voices found new strength. Immigrant families, long told to keep their heads down, shared the clip with pride. "She speaks for us," one mother wrote, her post going viral. "For every time we've been told to wait, to be quiet, to accept less today, we saw what's possible." Black and brown girls posted side-by-side photos, Crockett at the mic, themselves in classrooms, on stages, in boardrooms. "We belong," they wrote. "We are not afraid." Even some political opponents, caught off guard by the tidal wave of support, offered grudging respect. "You have to hand it to her," one conservative commentator tweeted. "She stood her ground. That's leadership, whether you agree with her or not." Others, less gracious, tried to spin the moment, but their words were drowned out by the sheer volume of praise. Meanwhile, Alito faced a backlash he hadn't anticipated. His supporters tried to rally, but the narrative had shifted. Editorials questioned his tactics. Late-night hosts lampooned his arrogance. Even some of his colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with a losing fight. The old playbook, dismiss, belittle, move on, suddenly seemed outdated. Powerless against the force of Crockett's authenticity, celebrities joined the chorus. A-list actors tweeted their support. Musicians dedicated songs to standing your ground. Athletes wore shirts emblazoned with Crockett's words. The ripple effect was undeniable. What had started as a tense exchange in a congressional chamber had become a cultural moment, a rallying cry for anyone who had ever felt unseen. But the most powerful validation came from everyday people. A young woman in Detroit posted, "I watched that clip with my mom. We cried. We've never seen someone like us stand up like that and win." A teacher in Texas wrote, "My students are talking about Congress for the first time. They see themselves in Jasmine Crockett." A retired veteran in California commented, "I may not agree with her politics, but I respect her courage." That's what America is supposed to be about. The backlash against Alito grew. Petitions circulated demanding accountability. Editorials called for a new kind of leadership, one rooted in service, not self-preservation. The old guard felt the ground shift beneath their feet, the certainty of their power suddenly in question. Yet, as the headlines multiplied and the memes spread, something deeper was happening. The conversation was changing. People weren't just talking about a viral moment, they were talking about what it meant, about who gets to speak, who gets to lead, who gets to define the future. Crockett's response had become more than a comeback. It was a spark, igniting questions that had simmered for generations. But beyond the headlines, this moment sparked a deeper conversation about who we are as a nation. In the days that followed, Jasmine Crockett's words echoed far beyond the walls of Congress. She didn't just win a debate. She reframed the entire conversation. When asked about the confrontation, she didn't gloat or attack. Instead, she spoke with the same calm conviction that had carried her through the storm. "This was never about me," she said. "It's about what we choose to value as a country. Do we reward arrogance, or do we honor dignity? Do we serve our egos, or do we serve each other?" Her message resonated because it was bigger than politics. It was about the daily battles fought by millions of immigrants who work twice as hard for half the recognition. Women who are told to be quiet, young people who are told to wait their turn. Crockett's story became a mirror. Reflecting the struggles and hopes of a nation still wrestling with its own identity, she reminded America that dignity is not something granted by the powerful, it's something claimed by the courageous. "You don't have to be in Congress to stand up for what's right," she told a crowd of students. "You don't have to have a title to make a difference. Every time you choose truth over comfort, Every time you lift someone up instead of tearing them down, you are shaping the future of this country. Forged in adversity became a testament to resilience. She spoke of her parents' sacrifices, of the teachers who doubted her, of the doors that were slammed in her face. But she also spoke of hope, the hope that comes from refusing to accept less, from believing that justice is possible, from knowing that every voice matters. America is not perfect, she said, but it is ours to shape. Every generation gets to decide what kind of country we will be. Her words inspired a new wave of activism. Young people registered to vote in record numbers. Community leaders organized town halls, using Crockett's story as a rallying cry. Families gathered around dinner tables, talking about what it means to stand up for dignity, to demand justice, to believe in hope even when the odds are long. Crockett's example became a blueprint for courage. She showed that you can face down hate without becoming hateful, that you can answer arrogance with grace, that you can meet power with truth. She reminded the nation that service is not about self-promotion. It's about lifting others up, about leaving the world better than you found it. And in that lesson, people found themselves. They saw their own struggles reflected in hers, their own dreams validated by her victory. They realized that the fight for dignity and representation is not just for the few. It's for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. As the dust settled, one thing was clear: the future belongs to those who stand tall, even when the world tries to tear them down.
So when Justice Alito scoffed at Jasmine Crockett's law degree, he thought he could dismiss her, diminish her, and silence a new voice. Instead, he sparked a moment that reminded America what real leadership looks like. Crockett didn't just defend her credentials. She defended the dignity of everyone who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told they don't belong. This wasn't just a viral exchange. It was a turning point, a reminder that the old playbook of arrogance and exclusion is no match for the courage of those who refuse to back down. Crockett's story is proof that when you stand tall, when you speak your truth, you don't just survive. You inspire others to do the same. If you felt seen, if you felt empowered, if you believe that America is strongest when every voice is heard, then this is your moment too. Don't let it end here. Subscribe to this channel, share this story, and join a community that believes in justice, representation, and the power of truth. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And together, we can build a future where dignity always triumphs over hate. Because the next time power tries to silence truth, it might just be your voice that changes everything.